Hello, and welcome to the June HMIS users meeting for Durham. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you this month, so we are pre-recording this meeting ahead of time. And then, of course, you will have the opportunity for Q&A with my colleague Katie during our regularly scheduled time at Thursday at 10 a.m. Well, let's get started with today's content. So our agenda today includes a lot of different updates, as well as some refresher reviews on the How We Can Help section. We're going to go over some housing move-in date resources and project exit dates specifically. And then, of course, we'll look at the calendar and what's ahead. All right, so diving into system updates. First up, we have the advisory board goals. So the advisory board is the governing board of our implementation, HMIS at NCCEH. And this board has set some goals for us for the July 2021 to June 2022 fiscal year. That fiscal year is our contract year with WellSky for our software. So that's why that year is the mid-year. And they've set these goals to help guide the work of both the data center and the board as a whole. And so we really wanted to bring these to you as a heads up around the strategy and the focus points of the implementation over this upcoming year. So first, we've got to implement a feedback and evaluation process for a help desk. So this obviously intersects with how you interact with the NCCEH data center and our help desk. So we're excited about pursuing this and making sure that you have some multiple points of feedback and evaluation. Secondly, we want to leverage a tool from HUD for HMIS lead improvements. And this document is outlined and was recently released by HUD to evaluate 9 categories and set a baseline understanding of the implementation. With this HMIS lead improvement document, we hope to set a framework for how to continue to improve the implementation as we continue to develop. And then finally, with the third goal, we want to increase end user, that's you, participation and engagement. And part of this means improving and expanding trainings. So this third goal is probably where you'll see the most development from the data center, and partially because it directly is referring to our end users, our HMIS users, and making HMIS and the data produced usable, engaging, and always accurate, right? All right, so that's our big update from the advisory board, and look forward to sharing improvements and progress on meeting these different goals throughout the next year. All right, our next system update is around assessment changes set to occur July 1st. So the first assessment update that we have is occurring both in HMIS and on paper references. And this is to have all standard projects remove the COVID-19 questions from the client profile tab. These questions were added last, I think it was April, very soon after the pandemic was kind of spreading across the country and the world. And really before widespread testing and vaccinations were available. And so the collection of questions like symptomatic, start dates and dates was meant as an option to better assess the pandemic in your own agency and in our COC, our community. But we're in a very different phase from last spring. The spread and the response is just very different. We have some different resources, and our public health partners actually have better data on who's contracting COVID and just the spread overall. So with that, with those other data sources being kind of better and in a different place, and with the fact that even the folks that were using these optional questions, that's gone down over the past 6 months, we're recommending that we remove and retire these questions. So do let us know if this impacts your agency at all. And just a reminder of what these questions were. These are the ones as you scroll down the client profile tab, you'll see a little header for COVID-19 information. And this was a collection of questions that WellSky helped support around symptoms, around testing, around quarantine and isolation. And so I feel like this is a good time to kind of declutter the client profile tab. If we're not using this, let's remove it. All right, our second update to assessments, and this will impact more folks, I believe, is that all standard projects will have the county of residence and city of residence questions removed from both the project start and intake assessment. So you've seen these questions, they've been in the system for a long time, but the data from them hasn't been used in quite the same way over time. So funders and other state partners used to request this information a lot. We haven't seen requests from the data center for this in some time. And the other thing that moves us to retire these questions is that it gets really confusing with another very important data element, the NC County of Service. And that refers to where the client is now, not where they were in previous iterations of their housing journey. So hopefully by removing and retiring county and city of residence, we can cut out some extra or confusing questions for both you and the client to deal with at intake. Now, of course, if you do have a funding requirement for these questions, let us know. We already know that Entry Point Durham needs to retain and keep county residents to meet grant requirements. So that is on our radar, and should there be any other project that needs this information, please contact Help Desk, and we can troubleshoot and figure out some ways to meet that need. All right. And as a reminder, this is what those questions look like in our start or intake assessment on the night before. What county what was the client's county of residence or city of residence? And I know I've heard from a lot of folks over the years about the city of residence question in particular being very annoying with that lookup function. Just it takes 5 different clicks to kind of get through and select whichever town or city that you need to. So that will be retired soon, and starting July 1st, you won't need to navigate that. All right, there is also an addition coming on July 1st, and this is for the standard emergency shelter, ES, and transitional housing, TH, projects. So we're adding current living situation, and adding this element of current living situation is going to help a little bit with coordinated entry in HMIS. It allows more accurate and up-to-date tracking on a client's living situation. So when a client presents for services at shelter, you already have need to confirm the prior living situation. Where were they staying last night? But current living situation is a lot of times different, right? So potentially someone was able to stay one night in a friend's house last night, but tonight they are literally homeless. Their living situation becomes emergency shelter as they enter that project. And so by confirming that through current living situation, you're able to kind of more accurately show the client's journey through the data. And that can certainly help with reporting and reduce the burden in other areas of the system. So we really appreciate shelter and transitional housing projects just confirming that yes, the client is now in shelter or transitional housing. So if you do have any questions about this, you can definitely review the training on coordinated entry data elements online. You can always find this on our training and knowledge page, ncceh.org/HMIS/training. And so that training is up there. It's the first element in that training if you would like to review that. For shelter and transitional housing projects, this will be very pretty simple, straightforward. You in this screenshot here, you see you click the add button, you confirm the date, it's the same date, start date, end date, information date, same all around, and then you select from the drop down emergency shelter or transitional housing. That's it. Save. Move on. So relatively little to ask of y'all, and that will definitely help. Now this isn't this is something that we're implementing over time, right? So this isn't something where on July 1st we are requiring all active clients have this. So do please just include this in new clients as we move forward. All right, and last but not least, we want to clarify some language on the paper forms for date of data collection to change to start or update on the project start and project interim forms. So as of now, that says date of data collection, just to align with the definition of project start and just clarify what's a little bit more. We're going to just change that label slightly and implement that change with the rest of these changes on July 1st. All right, so we've got 4 main changes there for July 1st. We're removing COVID questions. We're removing county of residence and city of residence, except entry point. We're adding current living situation to shelter and transitional housing projects, and we're modifying this label for date of data collection. These changes are going to occur on the paper forms as well as in HMIS. So just a heads up, if you were thinking about printing a whole bunch of forms, maybe don't print 1,000, print a little fewer to get you through the next week and a half or so, but be ready to print some new forms. Now, these changes aren't very dramatic, right? So if you have forms on July 1st, July 2nd that are, technically not the new ones, you can still use those for your data collection. It has enough coverage to warrant that. So you can definitely use up your paper forms that you have already printed, but just hold off on printing more until we get these new ones updated. For those of you that are ESG, state ESG grantees, just know that we're also working with them to get that up-to-date paper form on their website as well. So that should all align on July 1st. All right. Next update we have for you is on the restructure script. So this is the final step to the HMIS transition. Can you believe it? We're very excited over here at the data center for this step being completed. what this script does or did was remove level 3 for the county division of projects. And it also had some specific grant consolidation attached to it as well. This only directly impacted a handful of agencies with multi-county projects or with those grant consolidations. This was scheduled for June 17th. The system was offline for several hours, but it was back online about 3 hours early, which was great, by 11 a.m. So this was completed. It is done, and those agencies that were directly impacted, you have direct communication with Nicole from our team to give you further guidance. But this is done, and just want to thank you for your patience as the whole site had to be shut down for a few hours to accommodate it. All right. We also wanted to introduce the data quality plan. This is something that the HMIS is the HMIS lead agency's responsibility to develop and implement. And since our implementation began in 2019, we've really focused data quality around the federal reporting season. And while that meets the minimum thresholds, it's this past year especially, it was really hard, right? Because we had those 3 back-to-back federal reporting seasons. And so it felt like, I know it felt like for us, it probably felt like that for you too, that we were just cleaning data for 6 or 9 months, right? And so it can be easier than that. That's what we want to do is with this new data quality plan, make it easier, more efficient, and better year-round. So we're developing a year-round plan. We really want your feedback. We are sending out a survey, a kind of digital survey for you to submit should you want to. And in that survey, there's also a way for you to self-select and ask to join the focus group so we can have a little bit more in-depth conversation around the data quality plan. We really want to emphasize that, better data quality means easier corrections for reports, right? So kind of taking the pressure off those federal reporting seasons and making sure that there's some more maintenance year-round will hopefully make data quality, accuracy, and usability better for everyone. So that at any point during the year, if you need to pull a report, you have confidence that that you've reviewed and updated anything that needs that. And we really want to also just emphasize that we're approaching this as support. So this plan, this process is about supporting agencies to improve data quality. And so we really do appreciate your feedback. This is going to be a really constructive process and just, shine a little bit more light on your data for you to see. So what is included in the data quality plan is benchmarks for error rates by project type. So we know that different projects have different, data collection slightly, and just a different flow. And so the benchmarks, our draft benchmarks reflect that. And the other part of the plan in terms of implementation is that regular reports will be run by the data center and sent to agencies for each project. So we will be running reports, sending them to you and saying, this looks weird, take a look at this. And you'll have a chance to update that or make corrections, much closer to the time that it was actually collected, entered, and so you have better resources to address that potentially. We will start off with, we're estimating monthly, but that could change as we roll this out to quarterly. So we're just saying regular reports there. All right, so really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the benchmarks for error rates and that plan moving forward. Okay. One quick reminder for our update, our kind of system-wide section of today's meeting is HMIS licensing reminders. So we wanted to let you know we are kind of recommitting to some policies and reframing some of the communication around that. And so wanted to take this opportunity and remind you about our licensing policies. So first off, training. Now, you all are already HMIS users, but if you're supporting someone else in the agency, make sure you know that training requirements must be completed within 30 days. If not, then the training is going to have to be restarted. So we want to give you a solid amount of time to do the training, complete those requirements. But really, if it's after a month, you're probably going to forget some of what you heard in the first couple trainings, right? So we want to get that wrapped up in 30 days. Once training requirements are completed, new users must log in within 30 days. So again, just trying to really make sure that you need the license, that you're not forgetting things from the training you just worked so hard on. And so that's the reason for that standard. And just so you know, if you don't meet that login within 30 days, you're going to need to repass a practice client. So we'll let you know about that. And if not, your license is removed, and you'll have to start training over. So we don't want that. Log in when you get your license information. And then finally, log into the system at least every 60 days. This applies to all of us. We all need to make sure that we're logging in at least every 60 days. Again, doesn't seem like too much to ask if you're really using your license. If not, it will be inactivated and you'll have to repass the practice client within 2 weeks, within those 14 days, in order to get access back to the license. And so, again, if not, then the license is removed and you have to start training again. This is an important way to make sure that folks are using the system frequently enough to remember the steps. It can be complicated, right? So that's one of the reasons for this. And yeah, so we just appreciate your help with this, and let us know if you don't need a license, or if you're an agency administrator, if a colleague doesn't need it. That is the question we'll be asking as folks meet these 30 and 60 days thresholds. All right, so for how we can help our kind of training refresher, we want to start off with what's a housing move-in date. Now, this is one of the most important data elements or questions in the system. This is what records when a client moves in and begins to sleep in a unit supported by a permanent housing project. This is the kind of ultimate goal, right, of interrupting the experience of homelessness, of being able to sleep in a permanent housing unit. So this is really exciting and really important for data collection and data entry. Now, one key thing about this data element is that it's only recorded by our permanent housing project. So if you're an emergency shelter, a transitional housing, supportive services only, or homeless prevention, you're not going to collect housing move-in dates. You collect other things like exit destination. But we do want everyone in the system to know what a housing move-in date refers to, so you can have really good conversations for community coordination. Now, we had a hard time with HIC and housing move-in dates. So we have brought this up over the last couple of user meetings. We wanted to make sure that we're providing some additional support for permanent housing projects. And so we invited all users from permanent housing projects to a June 16th technical assistance session. We had a good training, I think, good meeting. Really talked about some specific circumstances, but we also know not everyone was able to make it. It was Capitol Hill Lobby Day for NAEH, so I definitely understand if you were there instead, but we're going to have a last chance offering of this June 29th at 10 a.m. You can go to our calendar online, ncceh.org/events for details, registration, login, all of that. We really hope that you're able to come. This is essential to permanent housing work. So if you have access to a rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing project, you really need to make sure that you get this additional support. Once we review who's able to come June 29th, we will reach out to agency admins and support folks with some reference materials, maybe a recording. But we really want to make sure that there's an emphasis on live training, because that's where you can ask your questions and fill in those gaps that might not be apparent when we're just running through the content. So really hope to see you there June 29th. All right, and for our next part of how we can help, our kind of training refresher, we want to continue our series on data collection stages and think about when does enrollment end. Now, hopefully you're really confident about when enrollment ends for your own project, but we want to make sure that there's some cross-pollination of knowledge, that you're able to see the differences and understand the differences for enrollment ends or exit dates with other projects as well. So let's look at this. So what is a project exit? Well, when a client leaves your project, right? It's that last chance to collect and record data. And this is very similar to Project Start in that it's a snapshot of the client on their last day. It's the context, it's how does what do their resources look like? Where are they living? What's that situation like on the last day? And so this is a really key opportunity and kind of one of the last opportunities to really update client characteristics outcomes. What has changed for the client over the course of their engagement with you, their enrollment. You can, there is some follow-ups, but this is really the key part where HUD is looking at, where funders are looking at those outcomes. And the other thing to note is that this is really required for all clients. So, a lot of times we think about households as a unit or heads of households specifically, but if a client has a start, eventually they need an exit, right? So that does include all household members. Okay, so let's break this down by project type for a little bit more detail. We'll start with street outreach, and this is kind of the most detailed and nuanced project exit date. So let's really dig in here. So street outreach projects can end when a client enters another project or finds housing, when they enter another outreach project specifically, if they pass away, they're deceased, or if the outreach worker cannot find the client and has no contact for 90 days. And so the no contact aspect of exit is pretty unique for street outreach, right? You're working with folks that kind of come in and out of services a lot of times. And sometimes it's just a few weeks and you can reconnect and it's kind of the same service enrollment, but sometimes it's longer, right? And at some point we need to acknowledge that they're inactive. And so 90 days is that cutoff. If you haven't had contact, if you haven't been able to record that current living situation for 90 days, then an exit is appropriate. Now, the key thing about street outreach exits when there's been no contact is the exit date is for the most recent contact. So it is for that most recent contact date. It's not when you realize there's no contact. It's for the last time you talked to them. And street outreach projects, definitely some of them operate a little bit differently in terms of whether or not they support folks in shelter. So those key services for street outreach are the supportive services for finding permanent housing, right? And that's a little bit different than our residential homeless projects, where that key service is the shelter, right? It is the bed. So residential homeless projects like emergency shelter and transitional housing, their project exit date is going to be when a client leaves the bed and does not return. So for project start, we talked about, the client's head hitting the pillow. For exit, it's about when they leave, when they get up and don't return that night. And so that's pretty specific to the core services provided by our residential homeless projects. Permanent housing, like rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and homeless prevention, to that extent that we're using that as permanent housing. The exit date is when services end and the client is no longer an official participant on the caseload. So different funding sources have some different rules about this, like when services can end. So definitely refer to those. But this is about when the client is taken off that caseload. And the services for our permanent housing projects are that, tenant support services, and sometimes that financial assistance as well. All right, and then for other projects, supportive services only or coordinated entry, it's when the last services are delivered to the client. And that is when that exit date occurs. All right, so we're going to go through some, one more thing to mention is that on our paper assessment forms, there is a spot to collect the date of project exit. So if you have your paper assessments near the front door, if you're a shelter and folks are maybe leaving sometimes more suddenly than others, you might want to have that paper assessment there, and there's a spot to mark down what the date is of that exit, should a client let you know that they are leaving. All right, so we're going to look at some examples, some semi-real life examples from our fake client, Henrietta. And let's start with street outreach. So this is for project exit date. And what we're trying to think through here is, what is the project exit date for a street outreach project with this example? So this is all we know about the client, that we had first contact on May 1st. We met a few more times, and on the fourth contact, we had a date of engagement when the client signed the ROI and was ready to be to have a case plan. Then on June 10th, that was the most recent contact. It was our 10th contact, and we were able to connect with the client. But then at the end of September, this client was actually, or Henrietta, was actually identified as inactive at a by name list meeting. So what is the exit date for Henrietta given this information? And the right answer is June 10th, this most recent contact date. So remember, you can exit someone from street outreach if there's no contact after 90 days, but the actual exit date for the client is going to be the most recent contact, the 90 days before. All right, let's look at another example for street outreach in a little bit of a different situation. Let's say the street outreach project is working with the client as they are engaging in shelter and permanent housing services. So here, Henrietta has our first contact May 1st, has the date of engagement on May 7th, and is able to access shelter on June 10th and our 10th contact, which is great. Then later on that summer, several contacts later, 24th in this example, Henrietta is able to move into permanent housing. So which would be the right project exit date for street outreach project, given this information? All right, I'm going to reveal the answer now. So it's actually either of these, right? It depends on the project. So if your street outreach services end when someone enters shelter, then that would be June 10th. But it might also end when the person reaches housing, July 30th. So it does depend a little bit on the local street outreach project circumstances. From a kind of HUD perspective, from a perspective of when the data center is reviewing data for system performance measures, either one of these dates is right, but it really depends on how the program is run. Okay. All right, let's look at our next example for residential homeless projects like emergency shelter and transitional housing. So here, Henrietta requests shelter on June 1st. Then on the 10th, she's actually able to access that bed and sleep in the shelter. And then she is able to move into housing on July 30th. So what is the correct project exit date for an emergency shelter or transitional housing project? All right, you can pause if you need more time. So the right answer is July 30th. So this is the last day when the client wakes up and is no longer sleeping in the shelter, according to this information from our example, right? So it's not when she begins sleeping in the shelter, because that's her project start date. So the exit date is July 30th. Now, this is also potentially the exit date, no matter the destination. So it could be a positive destination, like moving into housing. It could also be a not as positive destination, moving outside, moving to a tent. So just a reminder that it's not necessarily about the type of place they're leaving, but it's about the fact that they're leaving that shelter or transitional housing bed. All right, so project exit date for permanent housing projects like rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and homeless prevention, they have a different set of services. So let's go through an example for Henrietta. So June 14th, Henrietta is referred to a permanent housing project. On the 5th of July, she accepts after case conferencing, and the provider accepts too. And then in September, she has a move-in, September 8th. On the 10th of October, the second month of rental assistance occurs. And then rent is covered by the client beginning the next month, November. So what is the correct exit date for our client? It's going to be this November date when the services end, right? The financial assistance ended, and so that would be the exit date. Now, of course, if you're required to continue services for 12 months, this example isn't quite accurate, but it's about when those services end. So whether that's the financial assistance or the supportive services, and that looks a little bit different for different projects and for different clients, depending on their resources. So be aware that that is a little bit of a different calculation, but it's about when those services end. So if your last case management or exit interview happens, maybe with this timeline, October 31st, but your rent pays through the end of their lease month, the exit date is going to be that November 8th date, because it's the last date of that service. So it's kind of like whichever comes last the supportive services or the financial assistance. That's going to be your exit date. All right, and let's take a look at an example for a supportive services only project. Here, this is kind of a community emergency assistance project. Henrietta presents her services May 1st, gets a meal the next day. Apologies for the year misstep here, typo. But she gets a community meal the next day, and then is able to qualify for the utilities assistance the next month, and has enrolled in a budgeting class, and that ends June 18th. So given this information, when does our project exit date occur? And that is its last date of services, June 18th. So, with this example, this is the last date of services, and so that's going to be the exit date. All right, so hope that review was helpful. If you have any questions, please do join us at that regularly scheduled time, and Katie can help you out. So as we look for our What's Next calendar, we have talked about housing move-in date training on June 16th. We have some downtime on June 17th. And do want to note that the last chance housing move-in date training has been scheduled for June 29th, Tuesday. That's kind of a round two secondary option. On July 1st, we're going to have some new assessments become active. So we went through those changes early on. And we look forward to seeing you July 22nd and August 26th for our HMIS users meeting. Usually, or almost always, the fourth Thursday of the month. For those of you with ESG COVID funding, the data center is submitting a CAPER on your behalf to HUD by July 30th. So please try to clean up that data year to date through the end of June before then, so that we're submitting accurate data. And then we do want to give you a heads up that around the corner in September, we're going to have our annual privacy renewal training and new data standards training. So it will be a good month for learning and refreshers because there are new data standards coming that you'll need to be aware of for October 1st. And HUD has indicated that once the federal fiscal year ends in the end of September, they are going to start right up with the LSA and that longitudinal system analysis series of reports. So we will dive into that next reporting season after October 1st. All right, well, I hope this was a useful review for you. Went through some important updates, some helpful reminders on training. But if you have any other questions, please do reach out to us. We are at HMIS@ncceh.org and look forward to seeing you again soon.